Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of The Ownership Effect. I'm your host, Jim Bonham. Our guest today is Kendra Isaacson, a principal at Mindset, a bipartisan public policy firm here in Washington, D.C. Kendra joined me for a wide-ranging conversation about ESOPs and retirement policy. In fact, she had so much great information and insights to share that we couldn't fit it into just one episode. So today, we're presenting part one of our discussion, where we talk about ESOPs as a public good and explore why a big majority of both Democrats and Republicans in Congress are so supportive of ESOPs. I have with me here today a good friend and one of the real experts in public policy here in Washington, D.C., Kendra Isaacson, who we've worked with for many years on ESOP policy and tax policy. And now Kendra is a principal at Mindset, which is an advisory and advocacy firm here in Washington, D.C. But prior to joining Mindset, she had a long career on Capitol Hill and at the Department of Labor. Kendra, tell us a little bit about what you did on Capitol Hill and what you do now.
Sure. When I was on the Hill, I worked for Senator Patty Murray from Washington State, and I got to spend time in both the majority and minority on the Help Committee. And so I was the P part of the Help Committee, the pension department.
What does HELP stand for?
Health, education, labor, and pensions. And as I like to say, it's hell without the P. So
that was a pension joke.
It was, we don't have that many, so I have to try to get some laughs in every once in a while. But I was there with Senator Murray for about 8 years. And prior to that, I had been at the Department of Labor in the Office of Policy and Research, where we analyzed and provide technical feedback to the Hill on lots of different legislation. And while I was there, I was sent to the Education and Workforce Committee on the House side to help out with the big multi-employer pension legislation. They needed someone who had worked in that area. And so I was voluntold to go work there for 6 months. But it was so fun. I never wanted to leave the Hill after that.
So this show is about employee ownership and ESOPs in particular. So what does retirement policy have to do with employee ownership?
And when ERISA was passed in the 70s, just a couple years before I was born, in 1974, they had this view that an ESOP was a benefit plan. And so it was structured as a retirement plan. And so it had, and ERISA was created in the wake of a bankruptcy from the Studebaker car company, those long station wagon cars. And so because of that, and people were left, right before retirement without any pension and without anything, there were lots of ideas on the Hill of how to fix this so it would never happen again. And so there were tax committees that were very involved, and there were labor committees that were very involved. And what resulted is this kind of odd structure where we have half tax, half labor provisions. And they serve different functions, but ESOPs were rolled into that. They didn't have a natural place elsewhere.
Well, that's sort of an interesting story there. And we've told that a little bit before on the show, where Louis Kelso, who was sort of the inventor of the ESOP concept, was actually a banker who liked to describe himself as an economist. But what he had developed was this idea for a mechanism of finance as a banker, where employees could purchase a company from their employer and over time be able to run it for their own benefit. But most employees didn't have any access to capital. They didn't have the personal savings to contribute, let alone the ability to take the personal risk that it would take to buy a company. And they couldn't arrange financing because generally they didn't have collateral. So Louis Kelso was spending years trying to convince the Congress to create some legitimacy in the law so that lenders would loan to employees. And he arrived on this idea of trying to include it in ERISA when it was being considered in the Congress. But it was being considered as, at that point, a retirement plan. So tell us a little bit about what ERISA is, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, and what all is included in that?
So ERISA, again, is this kind of odd combination compromise structure. And so half of it is about tax benefits and whether you're a qualified plan. And so you have to meet all of these minimum requirements in order to receive all the tax benefits. And so that's one side of it. The other side is the really protective, the labor side that's protective of participants, that's, overseen by the DOL. And that's where Department of Labor, sorry. And so that is where, participants have certain rights, and they have the ability to sue when they feel that, or when they have been aggrieved in some way, or there have been a breach of fiduciary duty. And so that's what is this really unique structure. There are really benefits to all stakeholders here, and both Treasury and the Department of Labor have very different charges and that they have to execute. So one is really about, making sure that you're meeting minimum requirements in order to get the tax benefits. And the other is to protect participants, to make sure that they, when they retire, have that safety net that they have been working for their career.
So you said an interesting term, fiduciary duty.
Oh, yes.
What does that mean, fiduciary duty, and who's a fiduciary, and how do they fiduce?
Oh, well, I love that you're using fiducia as a verb, because I think that should be the new verb, everyone. But a fiduciary is someone who has an obligation. It's the highest duty in law, to there are different types of fiduciaries. You have fiduciaries that are in your plan that owe fiduciary obligations to the participants in the plan. You have outside stakeholders who are fiduciaries to the plan, and they owe those, obligations to the plan. And so the fiduciary, whether you are a fiduciary, is a functional test. Are you holding plan assets? Are you managing plan assets? Do you have any discretion in doing that? And so there are a number of ways to become a fiduciary, and there are some that are just, you are a fiduciary in this respect. And so the term has become quite heated, I think, over the past, I guess, 12-ish years. There's been a regulation that has gone back and forth between different administrations about investment advice and whether someone becomes a fiduciary with investment advice. And while that's only one small piece of it, it has sort of taken on, everyone, just when they hear the term fiduciary, thinks of that one regulation that is
But for an ESOP,
quite controversial.
the fiduciary is what we would call in ESOP world the trustee. And the trustee is the person, in particular, probably their primary responsibility, first at ESOP formation, and then each year is to create a valuation for the company, and therefore the value of each share of stock or each interest in the business. And beyond that, the trustee isn't really involved in the day-to-day running of the business. They have they're not giving investment advice to the employee owners, but they're helping to establish through adequate consideration the value of the shares for the purchase or sale of an ESOP stock. So why is it important to understand that employee stock ownership plans are part of this retirement system, as opposed to just being a standalone way to own a business like an S corporation or a C corporation? Why is it important to sort of understand that concept?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple reasons to understand why it's important as a concept. One, they really enjoy bipartisan support on the Hill, and for different reasons. And it brings together some of the most disparate, political factions. You have very conservative individuals and very liberal individuals who come together in support of ESOPs, and their rationale is different. So, very liberal members of Congress love employee ownership because it, allows people to have some degree of control over their workplace and exercise their rights and own something, and work, there, all of those things are great. But then on the conservative side, it's access to capital and participants in the marketplace. And so these two approaches, come together in support of employee ownership.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk a lot about sort of, politics being on right or left, but really politics is really more of like a circle.
It really
And
is.
I like to say that, ESOPs are where the right and the left meet because, as you were putting it, the conservatives on the right see employee ownership as an opportunity to create more capitalists. That employee owners become much more in touch with the businesses they work with and work for, that they understand the implications of the decisions of the business, and it creates an alignment between management and workers that otherwise just doesn't exist in the business. It's always sort of it breaks down that us them way of thinking inside of a business, and it's all just us, and we're in it together. But on the left, um, liberals see it as an opportunity for the average worker to actually gain it as the company grows.
And build their wealth and dynastic wealth. And and putting it back into the context of a retirement plan, this is also hugely important because the different side, the right and the left also sort of they come together again with ESOPs, but get there in a different way. So, for more conservatives, this is an opportunity to make sure that you are not relying on social systems and the government when you're in your elderly years. And
Let's talk about that a little bit because we've sort of danced around this idea of, all right, ESOP plans are part of the retirement system, but the way that the retirement system is incentivized is through tax benefits. Now, what does Uncle Sam get out of this deal, right? Because when you give up tax revenues, I mean that's functionally what a tax break is. Is the policymakers have decided we will forego this revenue coming into the government because we are getting some public good in exchange for it.
some public good and also, increased exponential payout and dividends later. It's an investment for in a generation in the future. So, by providing those tax benefits right now for business creation and ESOP creation, it will allow again those employees to build wealth, really, you know, uh, get financially resilient and build their own um empires of sorts. But and then, so again, they're like taking they're bringing jobs back to their state. They're, building their own communities, which is really the most important job for a member of Congress, is making sure that their district and their state are taken care of. So they're keeping jobs in their states. They're building longevity for these businesses and really reinvesting in their community. So I think of it as, it's a down payment for the future, but it's also an investment in the individual local communities for these members of Congress. So that's sort of the short term.
It's interesting. We did some analysis on the Department of Labor's 5500 list, as we call it, and the DOL 5500 is a form that every retirement plan has to fill out and send in on an annual basis, basically telling the Department of Labor, here are all the people who are enrolled in our plan. This is, for ESOPs, this is what it's roughly what it's worth. This is these are the number of plan participants, or if they if they have terminated their plan, they have to file a form for that. So we did an analysis on the 5500 form a few years ago, and we took all of the plan participants for ESOP plans, totaled them up by state, and then we compared the total number of ESOP plan participants on a state-by-state basis to all of the other employers in each individual state. And what we learned is that almost universally, if you totaled up the ESOP companies in each state, they were going to be one of the top 5 employers in the entire state. So if you add all of the ESOP companies together, now that number might not be entirely fair because you have some large publicly traded companies that also have a small ESOP plan who may be employed in that state. So like, for a long time, Walmart had an ESOP plan. But in most states, you have a large aggregation of ESOP employee owners at companies that you would really consider to be an employee-owned firm. And it puts them as one of the larger employers in each state. And the reason I sort of make that observation is that for members of Congress, you said that their first job is to make sure that their state or their district is taken care of. And employee ownership is one of those ways that you can really root employment and job security and the economy locally. Because turns out employee-owned businesses don't tend to outsource their jobs to other countries.
Absolutely. And it's a tangible benefit that happens quite quickly. You can pass a law that would encourage employee ownership, and then you'll see it, maybe by the end of your term.
Okay, so what I'm taking away is one of the public benefits is sort of local job security and economic activity. But what about as a retirement plan, what's it producing for Uncle Sam?
Well, with ERISA is a voluntary system. The mandatory retirement system in our country is Social Security. And then we have this voluntary system, which is employer provided retirement. And so I think we are about 50% of workers in this country have access to an employer-provided retirement plan, and that is a big focus of Congress. How do you expand coverage? And so employee ownership plays a huge role in that, in making sure that people have a solid retirement, and they're planning ahead for their retirement. And so,
So why is that important that we have people planning ahead for retirement? I mean, I'm really trying to drill down here. Like, what do the taxpayers get?
what do the taxpayers get? Well, they get fewer elderly people who are in poverty when you get to a certain age, and we are at a real turning point in our country with the silver tsunami and the huge cohort of baby boomers who are retiring. I think the number is about 10,000 people are retiring every day. That is a lot of people that we will have to support, and the next generations are actually a lot smaller. And so that it puts a lot of pressure on Social Security. That's not what we're going to talk about today. We could spend a lot of other podcasts on that.
Well, we'll come back and we'll have a whole conversation about the silver tsunami and the retirement crisis, because I think ESOPs can play a big part of that. But what was retirement like before ERISA? I mean, in America, how did most people live?
Well, there were a lot of different theories of retirement. Pre-ERISA, there's the gratuity theory where an employer could just give you a retirement benefit when you leave if they wanted to, like a tip at the end of your career.
A gold watch.
Exactly. Maybe it would be cash, but maybe not. But then, there were also ways to sort of structure your benefits so that when you retired, you didn't have to pay out, or you would just fire people right before they would retire. So ERISA really tried to impose their vesting schedules and a lot of minimum standards and to do away with that so that people could, know what their benefits are. And that's a big part of ERISA too on the participant side is disclosure, making sure people understand what they are getting so that they can plan and rely on it. So, before that, they couldn't plan and they couldn't rely on it. Or maybe they did plan, but it wasn't guaranteed. So
For taxpayers, the real benefit of ESOPs is that it creates another mechanism apart from your Social Security or maybe your 401k, because most ESOPs actually also provide a second retirement plan through a 401k plan. But it provides another leg to the retirement stool.
yeah, so that
That is
stool
often
is
the biggest
much
leg.
more stable now through an ESOP because, in other employment capacities, you have your one leg of Social Security, you have your 401k, and pensions are going away right now. So that's a wobbly two-legged stool. But with an ESOP, you've got a leg of the, employee ownership, you've got your 401k and your Social Security. And that is a much more sturdy, stable retirement that you can look forward to.
Well, this has been really interesting, and I'd like to have you come back, and I want to explore a little more about what you introduced, the silver tsunami, and what role ESOPs may be able to play in solving that while also solving some of the other problems that have been facing our country. So, Kendra,
Absolutely.
thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and be sure to join us next time for part 2 of our conversation with Kendra Isaacson. And if you like the podcast, please remember to subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast player and our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on The Ownership Effect.